All right, friends, I have 2 minutes after the hour, and in an effort to respect everyone's time and allow Jessica the most amount of time to get through her content, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to today's webinar, Critical Conversations for Leaders, hosted by Grace Hill. My name is Stephanie Anderson, and I'm the Senior Director of Communication and Social Media right here at Grace Hill. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared with all attendees following today's event. If you have questions, please use that Q&A box located on your screen. Our speaker will be taking live Q&A at the end of her presentation. I'd also like to encourage all attendees to engage in the conversation using the chat box just as you are right now. This is a great way to connect with your fellow peers and share great ideas. So I'm thrilled to welcome Jessica Fern-Kirkland to our virtual stage. Jessica was most recently FPI's Management's Senior Director of Training and Development, where she doubled as a dynamic national speaker and strategist focusing on the learning of self and fearless failure. Over the years, Jessica has contributed her voice to numerous organizations, including us over here at Grace Hill, NAA, Zillow, IREM, Multifamily Leadership, Multifamily Insiders, Apartments on the Go podcast, and so much more. Jessica is currently pursuing her degree in industrial and organizational psychology. And interestingly enough, she serves as a human services commissioner for the city of Covington. That's your fun fact about Jessica for today. So Jessica will be sharing critical skills of proactive confrontation, helping to enable leaders to lean into healthy conflict and critical feedback to embrace tough employee conversations. And I must say, we are all here for it today, Jessica. I am excited to learn so much from you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And it was so fun to see where everybody was joining from today. Thank you again for joining me. And I won't waste another minute of having critical conversations for leaders. And as I was putting the finishing touches on this, I was thinking that this really is the great resignation secret weapon. And I hope that you'll be able to take some of these points and to be able to use them in your organization, because critical conversations and feedback is super important to not only employee engagement, but employee retention. And thank you so much, Grace Hill, for having me today. So Stephanie did a wonderful job recapping my introduction, but I do want to point out a couple things that are important to me, especially in this space. I do feel like fortune favors the brave, and I'm a little bit of a risk taker. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm definitely an outdoor enthusiast. I'm a mom and a new wife and a leadership junkie. So with that comes lots of different exposures to techniques and research and ideas and conversation. Critical thinking and thus critical conversations is something that I absolutely love to talk about. So like Stephanie said, a couple of objectives for the day. We're going to cover a basic communication overview and set the stage for our conversation. We're going to talk about the impact of employee feedback on engagement and in performance, how to have critical conversations, and then an implementation initiative to leave you with. So I'm a big quotes person, and I like to start off with this quote, which is kind of humorous, but it says, appraisals are where you get together with your team leader and agree on what an outstanding member of the team you are, how much your contribution has been valued, what massive potential you have, and in recognition of all of this, would you mind having your salary halved? Sometimes it feels like that when either we're receiving feedback or maybe we've given it. For some reason, it's really awkward to try and identify what am I supposed to say? Or should I follow up maybe negative feedback with positive feedback? And it can feel a little disorganized for the person receiving it because they're not really sure what to do with it. And we all know that conversations that might be a little bit more touchy or could ruffle some feathers are awkward to go into. And sometimes we end up getting in our own way and holding ourselves back from having those conversations because we are uncomfortable. And withholding feedback from an employee because we're uncomfortable could be one of the biggest disservices that we could do. One of the things I like to equate that to is, you wouldn't let your friend walk around with their fly undone. So we wouldn't want to let our employees we wouldn't want our employees to walk around with something that they could improve on, right? Things like maybe a report that could be more detailed. Not holding them accountable could be way more hurtful than helpful, right? So let's set the stage for communication basics. Typically, we think communication is verbal, but it can be verbal or nonverbal, and it's any method that we use to communicate ideas, thoughts, or opinions. So there's many different methods, right? We can use our voice, we can use our hands, we can use our facial expressions, we can communicate our feelings, thoughts, ideas, and opinions in many different methods. What makes communication critical is when those thoughts or feelings could conflict or exasperate somebody else's thoughts or feelings in a way that could create some emotion around it. So these are things where people have lots of values. So maybe there's a risk of violating values, or you think you could hurt somebody's feelings, or there's conversations where you're like, ugh, I know this is going to be hard to say, because you know that somebody might take that in a personal way. Those are critical conversations. And the reason why they're important to identify in advance is that in order for them to be successful, we need to set the stage differently than having a conversation with somebody about the weather. And it's interesting when you look at that, right? Because we wouldn't get fired up or emotional about a conversation about the weather. So why would we about performance? Why would we about something that maybe we could improve on? Well, there's always values associated there. Maybe I really value knowledge, or I really value my work ethic, or I value my performance. If I feel like that has been violated, or there is a risk of maybe me not looking knowledgeable, I'm going to naturally get defensive. So what we want to do when we know that it's a critical conversation is do our best to set the stage and protect that in order to have a productive one. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There is something important, though, to talk about in advance, and that is how COVID has ruined communication for everybody. Pre-COVID, we were able to use our nonverbal skills to connect with employees. We could sit next to someone and put our hand on their shoulder as we gave them critical and constructive feedback. We were able to have someone even just feel our energy. And COVID took that away from us. Think about just facial expressions, right? When you're wearing a mask on, all you have is your eyes. Your eyes have to do all the talking. And that's not a natural thing. So let alone not being able to feel that energy with somebody who's sitting right next to you. And in addition, you've got folks who are now working in a remote environment, which is not natural for humans to be in isolation. And it causes higher emotions, and it causes anxiety, and it does cause unnatural suspicion where we're misinterpreting emails, we're misinterpreting messages, in addition to things like Zoom fatigue that has caused us to use the wrong method of communication when we are delegating or discussing things that are of high priority. We're going way too fast and we are sending instructions over chat, or we are giving critical feedback over an email when maybe that should be a phone call, or maybe that should be a virtual discussion. We have to set the stage appropriately for the message that we're going to deliver. But we have to be even more careful because of the high emotions and anxiety and security, or lack thereof, that COVID has created. People are already on higher alert. So we have to do a better job of clarifying intentions and being considerate of how our words might be coming across. Before COVID, we didn't have to be as intentional about that. I think we all can relate to when maybe we've showed up to work and our email password doesn't work and we're like, all right, yep, today's the day I got fired. Why are we feeling like that? Where does that suspicion come from? And most often it is due to a lack of or a need to improve one of the three elements of critical communication. For any conversation to be successful, especially when it's around something critical, you need to have trust, you need to have safety, and you need to have intent. Trust is the number one factor in being able to build relationships up enough to have a critical conversation. I don't know about you, but I've never had a productive conversation about something that I cared about with somebody that I did not trust. We might humor them, we might give them the old smile and nod, but we might not be getting there with that person. It's also one of my biggest pieces of advice for new managers is to go in and build as much trust as possible. Without trust, nothing else exists. And it's really important to be strategic about building trust and ongoing trust as well. And that also takes a lot of vulnerability from our leaders to be able to open up and help people understand who you are, how you make decisions, and be transparent and honest, because that's how people will get to know your intent. When the intent is clear, then folks will be in a position to assume your best intention. That means they'll be less likely to take your words out of context than they will be to take them out of context and put a negative spin on that, right? When we're talking to people who we think are out to hurt us, it's in our nature to automatically assume that they mean the worst thing possible. Some imaging that I want to talk about really quick is one of my favorite things right now is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is it's a psychology theory about human performance and motivation. And I love this because it translates to communication in business very, very well and definitely relevant in critical conversations. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that in order to advance up the pyramid of needs, we need to first fill the bottom tier first before moving up to the second. So at the very bottom of the tier says physiological needs, things like breathing, food, water, shelter, clothing, and sleep. So unless I have those things covered, I'm not going to be able to focus on love and belonging, like friendship, family, sense of connection, if I am not sure if my physiological needs are taken care of. Safety and security is another great example. Health, employment, family, social stability. If I'm not feeling like my job is secure, it's going to be hard for me to exercise confidence in the esteem level unless I get those needs met. So when we're looking at critical conversations, let's say we need to have a conversation about performance and give some critical feedback. If somebody feels like their job is going to be in question, we need to work through that need first before holding them accountable to be confident and proactive, which we see in self-actualization. We can't have them be creative if they feel like their job is being threatened. That makes sense. So to help you see how this translates to business, here's it in business context. At the very bottom, we need to make sure that our employees have a good, safe work environment and the right tools to do the job. If they don't have that, then it's going to be hard for them to feel like they belong or contribute to that overall big vision. We want to be able to solve from the bottom first. The second, treated with respect, support for risk-taking, an opportunity to offer input and be heard. When we are talking about critical conversations, conversations go back and forth. It's not one person doing all the talking, it's an engagement, and it is switching roles of being an active listener or an active speaker. Recognition and feeling valued. We want to make sure that folks have that before we ask them to be creative. So this kind of gives you a tier of what to look for. I also like to use this in conflict too, which can also be kind of a trigger of critical conversations, is when there's conflict. Usually there's something pretty important that we need to talk about. I like to try and identify and almost build from the bottom when I'm going into that critical conversation to let somebody know, like, you're safe. Your physiological needs, whether you need to take a break, whether you need to grab water, or eat something, like just those basic things. What do you need in order to be engaged in this conversation? Making sure that they feel safe, right? This is a conversation about a report that you turned in this week. I want to let you know that your job security is not in question here, right? Just take it off the table. And then create that sense of belonging. You're a really important part of our workplace. And I want to make sure that I'm helping you be the best version of you. And that's why I'm giving you this feedback. Can you and I work together and come up with some creative ways that will help you provide more detail? Or can you let me know how I can best support you? In a situation or example like that, we've gone ahead and addressed all of the hierarchy of needs. So we're not leaving anything off of the table for someone to feel insecure about in order to accept that feedback. That makes sense. So how critical are conversations, right? 97% of workers believe that communication impacts tasks daily. I 100% support that statistics. If we don't know what to do, how well to do it, when to have it done by, or what perspective, it's going to be hard for us to get it done correctly. 28% of employees list poor communication as the reason for not delivering their work on time. If we don't know who's supposed to do what, we're absolutely going to miss deadlines, especially if those deadlines haven't been identified. This might be my favorite one. 58% of people would trust a stranger over their boss. To me, that is a mind-blowing statistic. That means every other person I would rather trust over my boss, right? Just a little over 1.5 persons. And then only 43% of leaders are skilled at giving constructive feedback that actually changes behavior. So we're going to work on that 43% today. And $420,000 is the average amount that miscommunication costs companies per year. It's pretty significant. And this is definitely a pre-Great Resignation statistic. I can imagine how much that has increased over just this year, because employees are joining in on this movement where they are asking for and requesting more, right? They are wanting employers who listen, and they're leaving employers who don't for employers who do. So the top reasons why employees are joining in on the Great Resignation are flexibility over time and space. New priorities, right? Like family. Family now has been more important than ever before. Career advancement. People want to know that they are going places. And picture right now on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that where that fell, and what a big motivation that is for people, right? Wanting that sense of belonging. And if they're not getting that, if they're not seeing that career advancement, they're going to be taking that action. Working to live versus living to work. All of us have felt that sense of personal connection to our lives outside of work. And it has definitely helped us see that, okay, there's more out here than just my job. We've got more of a sense of identity that's outside of the workplace. We want better work environments. We want to be able to speak our mind. We want to feel invested in. We want to feel like our employers care and that they respect our contributions and are giving us an opportunity to provide those contributions. We want employers who listen and better communication. And I want to demonstrate why feedback is the resignation's biggest fear. So these are some of the proven benefits to giving critical feedback. Feedback improves performance. It builds confidence, clarifies expectations, enhances even your own leadership skills, right? As a leader who is practicing giving feedback, every time you do it, you've got a chance to level up. It curbs poor behavior. So we notice that an employee is not performing. If we don't say anything or let it go on too long, you're just letting that person continue on a negative road that's not doing them or you any service. Opens up opportunities to goal set. And goal setting is one of those techniques that helps an employee see what their career could look like, or have you engage in investment opportunities with that person. So that career advancement, that growth path, when you goal set with an employee, nothing makes them feel more invested in. It builds relationships. Anytime you've had a critical conversation or you've been engaged in conflict with someone, whether that's healthy or whether it starts unhealthy, which is more combat, and turns into conflict, which is more progressive, you always feel closer to that person. It builds corporate communication. Honesty, transparency. We want to know where our companies are at. We want to get to know our company's personality and who they are. We want to see, is what you're doing aligned with what you say you're doing? And that boosts engagement and also loyalty. It promotes culture. When we've got a culture of feedback and we know that we value honesty and we know that we value transparency, and I've got someone who cares enough about me to tell the truth and they want to help hold me to a standard that is going to just help me grow, that's excellent. That's definitely the type of people I want to work for. Contributes to a positive work environment because we're also holding everybody accountable. We're not letting underperformers underperform. We're actively working with them to get their performance back on track to a level that meets everybody's expectations, as well as helping them get to the next level. It decreases turnover because employees feel engaged. They feel that they've got investment opportunities. They feel that they've got specific things that they can work on to improve. So that growth, that transformative end result, how do I see myself growing here? That becomes created through feedback. And then it can address brain drain, which is a common factor in the Great Resignation right now. That type of treading water feeling that you get where you're like, is this just what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my days? When employees want to contribute, when they're motivated, when they've got those bottom tiers already filled, they want to be able to get their hands dirty and give back. If we don't provide them opportunities to grow in their own career, which is providing them feedback, identifying opportunities for them to improve, they're just going to be sitting over there kind of spinning their wheels until the next great challenge comes along. Employees want to be challenged. They want to be motivated. We have to help them get there. And the impact of feedback speaks for itself. 25% is the increase in effectiveness of engaged employees. 14.9% decrease in turnover for employees who receive feedback. A 25% increase in productivity when communication is transparent. And 43% of engaged employees are getting feedback weekly. How often are you checking in with your employees? And I know that we all want feedback, but why do we sometimes hesitate to give feedback? These are the common things that get in the way of us engaging with our employees. The first one is time. Well, I don't have time to do that. Or in our mind, we're like, I'm just way too busy. Did you know, fun fact, that developing employees is the #1 responsibility of a supervisor? Not to be the highest performer, not to be the best of the best, but you are a supervisor to develop people. And it's one of the things that gets missed when we're hiring or we're promoting from within. We tend to promote the people who get things done the best. You are the best salesperson, you are the best closer, you are the best at financials, but maybe you need some support in the people development department, because your entire role is to develop people to be better than you. That way, you can promote and grow from within a company. Having time is a priority. I love to question that or push back on that when people say they're too busy. I'm like, what does busy mean? Does that mean I don't have time, really? Because we make time for what's important, right? Or does that mean I don't have the energy to try and figure this out, or I'm not sure what to say? I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. I check in with my employees, but we're not really getting anywhere. We're going to help you figure that out today. But I'm telling you right now, let's make time for it because it's definitely going to help boost that engagement and strengthen those relationships. It's a comfort factor. Giving constructive feedback and pointing out things that people need to work on is awkward. And we need to get out of our own way with that fear, because if we hold back on giving someone an opportunity to show up, right, we need to be able to hold them accountable. We're having them miss out on a development opportunity, and it's a disservice to your team. You're a supervisor. They're looking at you as a leader, like, show the way, go the way, know the way. And if we're not doing that and they're thinking that they're like, okay, yeah, I'm like doing great, I'm not getting any negative feedback, there's going to be a disconnection in what you are saying and then what happens later when the performance becomes out of control. It's best to do it on an ongoing basis. We're disengaged, so we don't really know what's going on, and it could be too awkward for us to jump in now. My best piece of advice, if that's you, if you're a little bit late to the feedback game, is to start at the bottom and to build some trust. Start checking in with your employees. Set a regular cadence of time that you're checking in just to build a relationship. You've got to get that trust in place first to have enough safety where they trust your intent and value your feedback. I'm sure that there are supervisors or leaders that you have worked for that you would follow until the ends of the earth. Like, I will follow you anywhere. And there's a reason for that. And I guarantee that reason is not because they told you you were awesome every single day. It's because they actually helped you develop as a professional. There's also leaders that would tell you something and you're like, yeah, okay. We don't take it seriously because they're not being a good example. Leaders are always good examples first. So before we engage in feedback, right, we've got to build that trust, set the stage, understand how people like to be led, how they like to be spoken to, because if we lead in a way that others don't follow, we might as well not lead at all. Just like if we speak in a way that others don't listen, we might as well not speak at all. You need both to give constructive feedback. We're unsure of how to start. Plus all those funky HR rules, right? We don't want to say anything that could get us in trouble. I don't know if I'm allowed to just call this out. What am I supposed to do with this? I promise your HR department is probably more than willing to help you have those conversations. There are formal performance tools and metrics out there, and we'll get to know the differences between a couple of categories of performance management in just a little bit. But if you're not sure where to start, talk to somebody, ask questions, go to your supervisor, someone you trust, and say, hey, I've got this situation and I'm not really sure what to do. There are going to be people who are experienced here that are going to help you. What we don't want to do is ignore it, because I promise it doesn't go away. And then fear, right? Fear of creating a hostile work environment, fear of creating negative relationships. What if you are that new leader? You are a newly promoted leader and you got to go in and you're cleaning up a mess, and you don't want to be that person that comes in like a bull in a china shop and just starts pointing out negative things. Well, that's only one way of how those conversations can go. We can balance care and candor and have conversations that truly invest in people while holding them accountable and getting them back on the right track. We don't have to go around pointing out people's flaws to be effective. It's just learning how. And the best way to navigate and work through fear is by getting to know it. And that's what we're going to do. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, what is performance management? And performance management is management that occurs more often. So we'll do a look at management versus a performance appraisal. So it occurs as needed. So it's ongoing, it's continuous. It could be as situations come up, but it's really best with goal setting and ongoing development. I'm not sure about you, but I was the A kid in my family. I got A's. I took my grades very seriously in high school, and I never got any of the praise, right? I never got any of the, hey, how are your grades? Or, hey, that's so awesome. Because my brother, who liked to get C's, got all of the attention there. And while I'm not complaining, we don't want to give our top performers no attention because they're performing well. High performance need love too, right? They need goals, they need achievements, they need opportunities to contribute. Don't forget about your top performers because your underperformers are taking all of your time. Everybody needs the feedback love. Performance management is initiated by the supervisor or employee, developed jointly, occurs as it arises. The goal is for the appraiser to understand performance criteria and how the employee's behavior fits. So that's a key piece to the puzzle if you don't know where to start. What is the expectation? And how does the behavior fit? A great way to start is by looking at your employee's job description. Are you meeting the cognitive abilities and the behaviors needed to perform the role? If you're not, let's identify how we can strengthen and improve. If you have an employee that has met all of them, go get the job description that is one above them and start working on those skills to get them prepared for advancement. That's a really great way to start that career development. The appraisee shares the appraiser goal of creating understanding. So everyone's acknowledged their job description, they understand the expectation, but they might not understand what behaviors are needed in order for them to get there and to get there well. So performance management is a little bit different than a performance appraisal. This is your typical annual review. It occurs annually, driven by HR. It's developed by human resources. It is an annual, or some companies do it semi-annually. I feel like the more feedback, the better. Maybe you're doing a semi-annual formal appraisal, but performance management should be happening all the time. The goal is to reach an agreement on the level of performance and areas to improve or work on, or ones that you're doing really well. Nobody wants to work hard for you all year just to hear, yeah, you were a pleasure to have in class, right? We want to know, am I done growing then? Have I hit my ceiling? How can I improve? The appraisee will then accept or reject the evaluation. So this is an entirely different concept than ongoing, performance management. That's more interactive, where this is more of an assessment of the behaviors, skills, characters, and traits needed to perform the job well, and how well are you doing. So the performance management should get them in a position to be appraised well in the categories. So maybe you should take a look at what the formal appraisal looks like. Maybe show the employee, say, hey, every year, this is what you're going to be evaluated on. And we'll have ongoing management and engagement in order to help get you there. So in the meantime, while you're working on management of performance, there are 3 typical things that we need to look at. And that is, how are you performing? So what are the behaviors exhibited in order to get you to meet the objectives? The effectiveness of those behaviors, which is the results. How well is what you're doing translating to hitting your objections? And then the productivity is the ratio of those 2 things. Is how well you're performing equaling what the proper ratio of the results should be? And we always want to be objective about performance. And that's kind of where it gets tricky, is to take our feelings out of it, especially when our intention or our assumptions of that individual might not be transparent. They might not be super objective and are a little bit more subjective. So this is really where we're framing feedback around. And this is positive or negative, right? I can give you positive feedback that meets this criteria, but it separates the person from the performance. And we want to focus on the performance. Remember that no feedback is feedback. And I absolutely love this quote. Nothing will kill a great employee faster than watching you tolerate a bad one. If we're not addressing performance concerns right away, you are sending a message. If you are the supervisor who's only touching in once a month just to see how things are going and you're not invested in that development, that sends a message too. So this is a kind of an offshoot of no response is a response. We need to make sure that we are actively and ongoingly giving feedback. Remember, it's your number one responsibility is to develop people. This is the future of your organization, right? You're training them up, you're upskilling. So 4 different types of talent conversations to have. We talked about the solid performer, right? Being able to maintain their value, giving them feedback, or maybe giving them a challenge on how to enhance a skill or to learn a new skill. If your very top sales or leasing agent is just knocking it out of the park, maybe their role is to come up with a new technique that they've never heard of and to provide that to you. Or they are the person who is teaching others or mentoring others. You can put others in a position to contribute or be a mentor without it costing you anything, but that gives them some self-actualization, helps them build relationship, things that are on those higher levels of human performance. Then they're connected to the company's overarching goals, which creates engagement and loyalty too. The future investment for your top talent. Start looking at those next level job descriptions. When's the last time you asked your employees, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? I would always want my employees to want my job, right? I want you to be better than me. I want you to outperform me. Where do you want to be? Let me help you get there. The underperformer needs improving performance conversation, and the potential performer, short-term success, right? That goal setting. I love goals because it creates investment, not only on the supervisor's end, but on the employee's end too. No investment, no commitment. If I set my own goals, I am way more likely to actually accomplish them and then hold myself accountable to them because I have a stake in the game. I always relate it back to my daughter's room, who's constantly a mess. But anytime I clean her room for her, it is literally a disaster in 24 hours. But if she cleans it, it is only clean for 48 hours. So I get a 24-hour return on investment of having her do the work herself. So we don't want to tell employees what to do. We want to engage them in an interactive process to improve, enhance, take their employment or their performance to the next level and really show that investment in our employees. A common formula, regardless of how you're giving a conversation or how you're going into performance, is SBI, which is situation, behavior, and impact. If we're going to talk about performance, if it's underperformance, because I know that it's easier anyway to identify how amazing an employee is, or maybe look at creative ways to enhance that performance. But I would reckon to guess that most of you are here because having the critical, tough conversations are a little bit harder. So when we go into critical conversations, being specific about what happened and keeping it factual is going to be key. We need to set the context for our employees to understand that what you're saying is valid. So we need to set the situation and anchor a time and place. We want to avoid generalizations. We want to say most of your reports or recently you have. We want to say, hey, yesterday when you were following up with that customer, I noticed that your energy was a little low. And to me, it sounded like you were being a little negative. Can we talk about that? Giving them actual time and place that allows them to pull the context. It lets them know you're paying attention, and it makes what you're saying valid, which builds trust when they can agree that the situation took place. At this point, we've not assigned any meaning, because we're getting to that in behavior. All we're doing is say, hey, I have this specific situation with these specific examples that we need to talk about. Then we're going to move on to behavior. And this is not how your behavior made me feel, but the observable actions. And taking your feelings out of it is really important because your feelings are always about the person. When you can separate fact from feeling, it's going to allow you to address the problem and problem solve and not people solve. That can be really difficult when we feel like we've been personally wronged, when we thought someone was maybe being disrespectful. We have to separate ourselves from that. Let's say you've got an employee who's showing up late all the time, and you're like, how dare they disrespect me like that? Like, how rude. It's got nothing to do with you, right? They're not responsible for how you feel. You're taking it in a way that's making their behavior personal to how you feel. And it's simply not the case. If we separate those two things, the actual behavior or the facts of the situation are the employee showed up late. No need to make inferences there. It only complicates things. And then the impact, what I felt, thought, or experienced as it relates to the business purpose of the behavior. So we identify what happened, what we saw, and then the impact on the organization or how it could have been taken or how I feel. That would be when it would be appropriate to use an I statement and not a you statement to help say, yeah, this is how this behavior is coming across. This is how it's impacting me. So notice this doesn't say TFA, which is think, feel, act. Usually when you're problem solving, you need the help of another person. And if you have decided all on your own without talking to anyone, what situation occurred, the behavior, how it applied, and what the impact was, and you decide to react based on that, chances are there was some storytelling going on in there, and we need to walk back down and focus on the facts. That's also the difference between giving fake feedback and real feedback. So examples are always specific and factual. I almost think that this is more important when we're giving praise to an employee. Employees want to know what they're doing well. Fake feedback is, like it says in the example, you did a great job on that project. It doesn't really say what the employee did well. It has been shown that positive and specific feedback will promote the similar behavior. So if we say, hey, you really knocked that project out of the park. It was not only done on time, but it was very specific, detailed, and I like how you went above and beyond and included really detailed notes. The chances of the employee repeating that behavior are very, very high because it was specific and you included it in praise. We also don't want our employees to feel like everything they're doing is horrible. So when we give them negative feedback or constructive feedback, we want to make sure that we're being specific as well and just focusing on the behavior. So if we say, your attitude in the morning just really isn't great, then you're asking them to fix the them problem, an innate characteristic that is attitude. Or we could say, hey, in the mornings, your attitude has been a little bit lower. Your energy has been a little bit lower. The customers have been saying that it's making them feel like you're tired or maybe not engaged, or they don't want to approach you because you're feeling a little bit sad or something's going on. Can we talk about that? You're not asking them to fix a them problem. You're like, hey, let's talk about your energy in the morning. Is there something going on? I want to invite you to have that conversation with me. Feedback usually falls in a couple different buckets. There's either positive feedback, which is comments about past actions that were correct and should be repeated. Positive feed forward, comments about future action that should be taken. Negative feedback, comments about past actions that were incorrect and shouldn't be continued. And negative feed forward, comments about future behavior that should be avoided. Negative doesn't mean don't do it. Negative doesn't mean avoid it at all costs. And negative doesn't mean please overcompensate negative feedback with twice as much positive feedback, because it ends up convoluting your message. We don't want to have a conversation about something that might need to be improved, like a detailed report or following up on leads or contributing ideas or closing out reports with, but you're so awesome and we love you and blah, blah, blah. That's important, but that conversation should happen all the time. We can solidify value, but we shouldn't follow up constructive feedback with something that overcompensates it because we're afraid of what they might think about us, right? Who is that serving at the end of the day? Is it serving us or is it serving the employee? At the end of the day, we're here to invest and develop them, right? I can't stress this enough. Feedback is honest, transparent, timely, and direct. The longer you wait to address an issue, the less valid it's going to feel. Like, hey, you remember that one time, like a couple weeks ago when you came in late from lunch? Can we talk about that? The employee will not even take you seriously. You'll start to lose credibility. If you are a leader who is addressing things right as they happen, not only will your employees know that you are on it and that you're paying attention, but they'll also be on their A game and will help them be engaged and they'll help them respect you and help hold themselves accountable as well. Being transparent is being vulnerable. And when we come from a place of care, like, hey, I care about your performance and the projects that you've been turning in, I know aren't up to your best standard. I want to help you with that. Can we talk about your last recent projects and where we can improve, or maybe what you felt what the issue was? Having interaction and transparency, being direct, right? Not fluffing things up or beating around the bush, because again, we're only doing it so we don't feel awkward, not necessarily because it's serving the employee the best. Like I mentioned earlier, feedback balances care and candor while honoring who the person is. I'm a big John Maxwell fan, and I've had the privilege of not only reading 5 Levels of Leadership, but taking a workshop on that too. And this is a really important one where we are giving feedback where it comes from a place of caring, but also is direct, right? Like we respect that person enough to be real with them. And that's not necessarily just from a leader to employee standpoint, but that's from an organization to an employee standpoint. We want to value the person, establish the relationship, shores up weaknesses, offers comfort, and makes the team pleasant. People want to know that you're a human being. And candor, right? Not necessarily too fluffy, but too direct where it feels harsh. It values the person's potential, expands the relationship, brings out strengths, offers a challenge, and makes the team productive. When we're having critical conversation, we need to make sure that we've got enough time and neutral territory. Cutting a conversation short, or like, hey, just want to let you know when I get back from lunch, I want to talk about you showing up to work late this morning. That employee then has to sit with that. Or the email that says, hey, please call me about this with no explanation. Oh my gosh. Those are the supervisors whose name shows up on your phone, on your caller ID, and your heart drops. We don't want any of that. We want to understand how our employees want feedback. It's a question that I ask new employees. If I need to give you critical feedback, how would you like me to do that? You can ask people. That's totally fine. It's actually a form of respect to allow them to engage with you that way. Neutral territory. Sometimes being in the boss's office feels like the principal's office, and you're already a little bit defensive. Take a walk, sit next to someone, find a way to neutralize those defenses. It will be one less barrier you need to break through. Then active speaking, respond instead of react. Even if you need a minute, there might be things that come up that trigger you a little bit. Ask for a second if you need it. Avoid absolutes. You always, you never. That's where those specific examples will come in. Use I statements. So when you this, I this. Not you making me so mad, or when you come into work, I feel like you're not respecting the work schedule and it impacts all the other employees. Not when you show up to work late, you look lazy. That's not going to solve anything. Be honest and transparent, assume best intentions. Sometimes a great way to do that, if you feel like you're taking something personally, might be just to start asking a lot of questions. Walk me through why you've shown up to work late the last couple days, or walk me through what's going on. It also allows you to give them the benefit of the doubt and invite their perspective to the conversation. That will automatically make that critical conversation more engaging and interactive. And like we talked about, be specific. Feedback is interactive. Leaders develop people. They don't delegate behaviors. You can't make somebody do anything at the end of the day. Our goal is to motivate them, set the roadmap, and hold accountable, right? We're guiding them. One of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. And that means active listening, right? Engaging, listening for clues, looking for things that you might not know, being curious about the situation. So to recap, we've got 7 criteria for effective feedback. So the feedback giver has to be credible. So like we talked about, building trust, safety, and intent. That also covers number 2. The feedback on number 3 is conveyed with good intention. Number 4, the timing and circumstances of the feedback are appropriate. So they're prompt and direct. Feedback is given in an interactive manner. We don't want to give anybody lectures, but engage them in that performance conversation. It'll help solidify that investment. The feedback message is clear. So it's not performance criteria that's overshadowed with compliments that might not even be necessary or could convolute your message. The feedback is helpful to the recipient. Sometimes I like to focus on what do I want them to hear versus what do I want to say in order to make sure it's effective. Or asking questions like, what did you hear out of that? Or how are you feeling? Or I know I said a lot. Can I check in with you right now? Those are things that will help open up the conversation with open-ended questions to promote that feedback. So here's your next initiative. It is feedback culture. And I truly believe this is going to help with the Great Resignation because most of the things that we talked about today directly impact the reason that people are leaving. Talking to people, being open, making them feel like they've got a voice, that all creates engagement and loyalty in employees, right? So feedback culture. Every employee feels that they have the right to give feedback to another person in the organization, regardless of title. Now, that doesn't mean that hierarchy doesn't exist. That just means that your voice matters, regardless of who you're talking to. And the goal is a workplace environment that welcomes and invites honest feedback between all employees, managers, and corporate staff. Remember the good old-fashioned suggestion box? That is kind of a virtual or cultural aspect of that, right? Is your organization, does it have a culture where feedback is welcome? Can I say what I want? In a respectful way, of course, but am I allowed to give feedback? Will my voice be heard? Just because we can't do it doesn't mean I can't be listened to, but is that my culture? I do feel like this is going to be the next wave of great initiatives that will help create that loyalty engagement that is causing resignation, right? So that is your critical conversations overview. And I want to go to Q&A here. So I've got my Q&A open and then chat. So we've got a couple of minutes. And Stephanie, I know you've been in the chat and we've only got a couple minutes. So if there's any questions that are being repeated or things we want to address, by all means, let me know.
Okay, great. You're having a lot of suggestions, a lot of people, of course, agreeing with you. And just these things you're sharing are very much resonating with the attendees. There's definitely a question from Tara Samuels. She wants to know, what is your feeling on supervisors collecting peer feedback on your overall performance to include in your annual review?
I love that question. And hi, Tara. Thank you for being here. I actually really love collecting peer feedback, and this is an actual formal method of evaluation. It's called 360-degree feedback, and there's lots of different templates out there in ways that you can do it. You can do it in interview form, you can do it in survey form, and 360-degree feedback is an extension of the review where you get it from the supervisor, and it's typically a peer, and then it's typically customer facing. So you'll want to establish exactly what you want, what your questions are going to be. But one of the reasons why I like peer feedback is teamwork. And how are you to work with? You could have the best numbers in the world, but we all know that employees are different to supervisors than they are to each other. Setting the stage that 360-degree feedback is included also gives that incentive for them to be accountable to that all year long. I also like peer feedback too, because if you've got a supervisor who maybe isn't as engaged as another one, you might get a better understanding of actual performance from someone, from their peer who might be engaged with them on a more intimate process on a day-to-day basis. So it just gives you a different view and perspective. If that's something that you're interested in, again, it's called 360-degree feedback. The supervisor feedback and peer feedback usually don't have a high level of correlation, and it's because that perspective is different, and that's okay. Keep in mind that anytime you're asking for formal feedback, that there are HR rules and regulations that are involved with that, and what type of questions you can ask. They need to fit certain criteria, so make sure you check with them before implementing any formal surveys or interviews.
Fantastic answer. MJ Bell asked, I think, a question that is top of mind. The term active listening is so popular now. Do you mind addressing how to become a better active listener?
Oh, yes. And as a professional with ADHD, I have spent an excessive amount of time learning how not to interrupt people. And one of the biggest things that I found that is helpful is clearing your mind and focusing on the speaker. So just telling yourself it's not my turn, right? Or my role is not to tell them how I feel. It is really to listen. A lot of it is a self-regulation that comes into play, and understanding, why do I feel the need to contribute this right now? If I didn't speak at all, what would the end result be? And like we said, there's no better form of respect than just listening. So being engaged, removing distractions, and being honest with yourself. Can you even have the conversation right now? Like if somebody walks in your office and you're not in a position to active listen, tell them, like, hey, I'm in the middle of 8 things, but I can clear some time for you at 3 o'clock. Can you come back then? Do the things for yourself that you need to in order to clear the distractions, in order to be present, and let them know after you're done speaking, is it okay if I do? But be careful not to cross over people's feelings with yours. Work on fixing one issue at a time. You can just table your stuff or how you might be feeling about it, process it before going back in. That will help you stay engaged in what they're saying. Oh, I know we're almost out of time, but I did just see, how do you give feedback to your boss without them getting their feelings hurt or taking it personal? Communication in the office is stressful. What's a nice way to construct feedback to a manager? Same things as giving it to somebody else. Build trust, set the stage. Like and I've had many open conversations with my previous supervisor, and she was always very receptive to that. They want to know, and I think that it's one of the things that employees might be missing in that Great Resignation is you have to give your supervisors the opportunity to show up for you. You can't fix what you don't know. So we have to step out of our comfort zone and bring it to the table in a way that is constructive, positive. It's not emotionally charged. And it's structured in a way where there's transparency and we're inviting their feedback. Maybe sending them an email like, hey, I would love to talk to you about some experiences here. Do you have some time to chat with me? Giving them an idea of what the topic is. But it's best to come from a place of care and candor and be transparent and direct. Give people the opportunity to show up for you. I'm sure you'll be surprised with how you're met with that feedback. But when it's careful and when it's respectful, making sure they're the right audience and really focus on what do I want to accomplish from this conversation? What are my objectives? Sometimes when we're speaking with our supervisor about problems in the office, we can get really emotional. And when we're bringing it to their attention, it can then sound like venting. So identifying in advance, what do I want my objectives to be? Is really helpful, especially for your supervisor, to help create the context in which they should be listening to you. Like, can I make you aware of some emotions that have been going on in the office lately? I'm having a hard time with it, and I think you should know. You know, what is their role supposed to be? All right. I know we're 1 minute over, so let me know if we need to be done or.
Let's take one more since we were a few minutes late getting started.
Okay. Let's do, I see one in the question. We just did 360 reviews for the first time and the feedback just hasn't been helpful. I'd like to do a good training next year beforehand for everyone. What key point do you think is the most important to include? I love that you asked this because it is very important in any review that you provide training, and it is the definition of the performance metric. What does a 1 mean? What does a 4 mean? And what are you rating somebody on? Usually there is a definition in the rating, and that's why they're all over the place, or you're giving someone who is, maybe you're getting a neutral response. So when you're doing it, there's a lot of different ways that you can structure the responses to maybe be on a higher scale, especially for peers, right? Because there might be a higher motivation to not ruffle any feathers. Always make sure it's anonymous. And then employees like bigger scales. So 1 to 10 versus 1 to 3. Between a 2 and a 3 is just too hard to define for some people. They might need a 1 to 5. And then what does a 1 mean? What does a 5 mean? And what does a specific performance metric mean? If you can get everyone on the same page, then you're most likely going to get better results. Also making sure that they understand how it's going to be used afterwards. So taking or getting rid of that, oh my gosh, if I give my peer a horrible review, is this going to come back at me? You got to take that off the table. Let them know and be transparent about why are you doing this, definitions of ratings and metrics, and then what's going to happen with it afterwards. All right.
Excellent. Well, the feedback coming in, Jessica, is love this webinar. Great ideas. Thanks so much for sharing. Hits home on things to improve on. So it seems like a crowd favorite for sure.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find on social media. And if you'd like to get in touch with me by email, you can email me. I am thejessicafern@gmail.com. If you forget that, find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and provide that to you and have further conversation.
Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge today. You are really impacting the lives of so many, and I can't wait to see what all the attendees are going to do with this great information moving forward. Thank you again to everyone who attended today. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and will be sent out in the next day to share, and we hope that you will share it with your colleagues and friends as well. Thank you again for joining us, and happy Tuesday to you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.